Hello, we're delighted to introduce our new report, Who's at Stake? The Role of the Stakeholder in UK Tech Policy. This project has been funded by Solent University, and in it we've looked at issues around power and representation and whose voice is included in UK tech policy. So we hear a lot about stakeholders in policy. This is true of any policy, and particularly in tech policy. But who actually is the stakeholder? What does that word mean in terms of who is making decisions, whose voices are represented, who is actually being included when policy is being designed? Is it for those who already have a stake in decision making? Policymakers, platform owners, big companies, academics at prestigious institutions, everyone who's already got a say in how policy is developed? Or is it by and for those who are actually affected by these technologies, which is everyone, and particularly those from marginalised or vulnerable groups? Now, in the past few years, we've seen a huge flurry of activity in the UK around policy concerning different aspects of technology, AI, data, platforms, and many other areas as well. And yet this hasn't necessarily led to a lot of concrete regulation, but it has produced a lot of policy documents coming out of a whole range of government departments. In this project, we analysed 194 of these documents to look at how the word stakeholder was being used. What ways is it being used? What does that mean? What does it tell us about what this word is doing, what roles it's creating, what power it's embedding in policymaking? And we compared this with whose voices are actually cited, whose opinions are actually cited in these policy documents. And from this, we also held a workshop with government and academia and funders and civil society, where we discussed these issues and also alternative ways of designing policy. And from this, we have developed a series of 6 recommendations for a more representative approach to developing tech policy in the UK and elsewhere. Our first recommendation is actually to stop saying stakeholder. The many problems we've encountered with the use of the term throughout this project show that we need to be more specific and more transparent and accountable in looking at who is actually being counted in policy. Recommendation number 2 is to push for representation, not consultation. The current policy processes are often a tick box exercise and often exclude those who could make a meaningful contribution. Related to this, our third recommendation is to make policy more flexible. There are lots of ways of engaging different groups in different ways and in different parts of the policy process, and many of these need to come earlier rather than coming up with a policy that fits an overarching agenda of those already in power and then simply asking for a seal of approval. Our next 3 recommendations are not just for government but for everyone. So recommendation number 4 is to identify key moments for intervention. So in our report we found that a lot of government sources cite other government sources. There's a circularity, but there are key points, key documents where a much broader range of views are taken into account, and the government needs to make this more apparent, and everyone else needs to take the opportunity to get involved and have their say and use these other methods, and this will only improve policy down the line. 5th, we recommend that people be a mediator and a representative. These are 2 roles other than stakeholder that those in power can take on. You can use positions of influence to include and elevate the voices of those who are normally excluded from these processes, either directly or just representing their interests, making sure those who are affected are at the forefront of decisions. Finally, recommendation number 6 is to be a gateway, not a gatekeeper. Those with privilege, those with a stake in the decision-making process should use this to open doors rather than entrenching reputation and influence among those who already have it. So in our report, we're really looking not just at what a stakeholder is or what's at stake, but who's at stake, who is affected, who's actually having a say in the decision-making process, and how can we challenge this? How can we do things differently? How can we find other ways of making policy in ways that give more people a stake in the power to decide how tech is regulated to protect them. So please take a look at the report, the link is below, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, so please do get in touch.